Alright, hi everyone. So in this video, we are going to do a quick recap on what we have learned previously in P1 topic 1, which is quadratic. Okay, so the first thing that we discussed in this chapter is how to do completing the square. Okay, so we discussed like why do we need the form, then after that to understand how the formula works. So by this time, you should be able to apply it by, without memorizing the formula, right? So the idea that we trying to assume is that x squared plus b squared can always be changed in a form of x plus b over a squared minus b over a squared. Okay, so for like a normal expression, which let's say the coefficient of x squared is not longer to be 1, which means you need to do factorization first so that you get your x squared to be in coefficient 1. Then after that, you will use the formula above to actually substitute in this part, then actually try to solve it. Okay, so that's the part for completing the square. Then after that, we learn how to sketch a graph, so like graphing. So we are talking about quadratic equation or quadratic function, right? So the graph that we are having is actually all in the shape of parabola. So meaning it's a curve that with a positive with a maximum point or a minimum point. So normally the graph that we'll be looking at is like x equals to ax squared plus bx plus c. So if it's in completing the square form, then it will be y equals to x minus p squared plus q, right? Okay, so in this part, then what a, yeah, so you can try to add an a in front also. So if let's say you have a positive a, which means you will get a graph that looks like this, then meaning that you will have a minimum point at coordinate p and q. Okay, so same thing, if let's say your a is negative, meaning that you will have a graph like this, then you will have a maximum point, which is p and q as well. Okay, then last thing is that when we talk about parabola, then we know that the graph is symmetrical at the axis of symmetry, right? So meaning that you can always divide the graph into two same part. So the line of symmetry, meaning the equation of the line of symmetry is always be x equals to p. Okay, so we know that it's always going to be a vertical line, so that's why it's like a line that parallel to your y-axis, so that's why it's like x equals to p, which p is the x coordinate of your maximum or minimum point. Okay, so that's the graphing part. But of course, you know that how to find your x-intercept and also your x-intercept and also your y-intercept over here as well. So from the graph here, then you know that the C part, it will be your y-intercept, right? So for x-intercept, you can just substitute y equals to 0 and then you try to solve it out. All right. Then after that, the next thing that we learn is how to solve a quadratic equation. Okay, quadratic equation. So you know that there are three main methods. So the first one is the most popular one, which we try to use factorization. Then after that, the second one is completing the square, meaning that what we have mentioned just now. Then after that, for the last one, we have the quadratic formula, right? So formula. So the formula is in a form of like negative b plus minus square root b square minus 4ac over a square. Okay, over 2a, sorry. Okay, so this is the three type of the method that you use. So normally if you have a whole number or if you have an integer or fraction as your answer, then we'll try to use factorization. So other than that, you need to use completing the square or formula. So please make sure that even you are using your calculator to solve, for factorization, you should always write them into bracket first. So for everything that you can try to solve in this form, it's factorization. So you must make sure that your answer is integer or fraction, then you only can do this. So don't do something like x minus 1.3798, which is obviously cannot solve by using factorization. So in this case, then you will need to substitute them into the formula and you solve the answer. Okay. So under this term, you also learn how to solve like some of the special equation. So for example, let's say you have an equations that look like maybe yeah 6x plus square root x minus 1 equals to 0. Okay, so you know that you need to let y equals to square root x, then after that you solve for x y squared plus y minus 1 equals to 0. So you solve a normal quadratic equation, then after that substitute back y equals to square root x to get your answer. So this one also apply to maybe trigonometry equation, or like the question where you have like x power 4 then x power 2. Okay, so the next thing after a quadratic equation, then we have how to solve quadratic inequality. Okay, so basically under this part you have two type of equations. So the first one is where we talk about x minus p, x minus q is lesser than 0. Okay, so in this case we try to treat q is a number that is greater than p. All right, then after that you have your second scenario, which is x minus p, x minus q, which is greater than 0. So it's the same thing. If you have equal to sign, then your last answer will have equal to sign also lah. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to like sketch a parabola graph. So we assume that the horizontal line here is our x-axis. So your smaller number put at left hand side, then the bigger number put at right hand side. So if you have your equation lesser than 0, which mean your y is lesser than 0, right? Which mean it will be all the value here. So greater than 0, then you will be sketching for the upper part. Okay, so for this part, your answer will be, after you solve it, then you will get an x that is lesser than q and greater than p. Okay, so for this part, then you will have two constraints here, which is x is lesser than p and x is greater than q. Okay, so it's the same thing. If let's say you have equal sign, then your last answer will have equal sign as well. So after this, then you know how to solve simultaneous equation. So I'm not going to explain how do you do that. Yeah, because I think you learn this in IGCSE and as well. So everyone should know how to do this. So it's basically in this chapter, we talk about like how do you solve simultaneous equation with in two variables. So normally you have one linear and one quadratic lah. Okay, so for the last part, we talk about discriminant. Okay, so for the part of discriminant is actually referred to b squared minus 4ac, okay, which is actually the part inside the square root for your formula. Okay, so you can imagine if let's say you have the term inside the square root to be a negative answer, then meaning that we can't solve a negative square root, correct? So that's why it should be no solution for your answer. So that's why it will be no real roots. Okay, then after that, let's say if b squared minus 4ac is equals to 0. So let's say when you have square root 0, then what do you get? You get 0 as well. So when you negative b plus 0 or negative b minus 0 is still going to give you the same answer, which after you solve it, then you will get two same answer. So that's why for equal to 0, it means that you have two equal roots. Okay, so it's the same thing, or sometimes we say that it's like one repeated root. So they both of them mean the same thing. Then the last one you have greater than 0. So meaning b squared minus 4ac is a positive number. So if let's say we talk about maybe square root 4, then you get 2, right? So negative b plus 2 and negative b minus 2 is obviously going to give you different answers. So that's why when you try to solve it, then you have two different solutions. So that's why you have two distinct roots. Okay, and then for the last part, I'm just going to do a reminder. So if let's say we are talking about greater or equal to 0, it means that you have two real roots. Okay, so meaning that you know that you can solve, you have a solution, but it can be an equal solution or it can be like a distinct solution. So that's why when the question gives you two real roots, make sure that it will be greater or equal to 0, because you're not sure whether it's equal or distinct. Okay, so this is like the recap on what we have learned in topic 1 quadratic. Okay, so just a quick information for you. So normally for this chapter, right, it won't come out as like an independent questions in the paper. So which means that normally this question, you will try to apply the skill and the knowledge that you learn to and then try to use it when you try to solve questions in other chapter, meaning that it always in a combination of the questions. So if let's say like completing the square, normally you will use this skill in the chapter of function. So the same thing in function, when you want to find domain or range, then you will need to use the skill of like how to sketch a graph, correct? So like solving quadratic equations, you use this anywhere as long as you need to solve a quadratic equation. So for discriminant, you also use this in coordinate geometry, which let's say you need to prove that between a curve and a line whether you have a intersection point or not. Yeah, so if let's say like greater than 0, meaning that you have two intersection point, then if lesser than 0 for the simultaneous equation, then meaning that there is no intersection point between the curve and the line. So for inequality also, so perhaps you will use it in like, for example, differentiation. When we talk about increasing function and decreasing function, when you need to solve the inequality, then which means you will need to use the scale here. Okay, so that's the overall idea for chapter 1. All right, so that's it. Thank you.